Hey now, it's overtime with Mike and JD, and I'm your host, Mike Gilbert, and I'm joined as always by JD Oliva. How you doing, JD?
Tired.
yeah. Yeah, man. So tonight's overtime is going to be a little bit different, and this is going to be something near and dear to my heart. I know some of you guys from the Fight Game Media Discord and or folks that have been following me for a little bit. I'm just very fascinated by the JFK assassination, the conspiracies behind it, the story behind it. I like people that think it happened exactly the way the government said. I like people that have a bunch of different conspiracies. I like all of it. I literally just cannot get enough of it. And this coming next week on the 22nd. So right now we're recording this on November 16th. So on the 22nd is the actual 60th anniversary of the JFK assassination. And lots of new documentaries are coming out. I've watched 3 in the last week. One came out on YouTube, and then of course National Geographic had a 3-part series, and then just last night I watched one that was released on Paramount Plus where they're just talking to the doctors from Parkland. They actually interviewed them like 10 years ago, and they just now released those interviews, talking with the initial doctors that took care of JFK where he died. And they've spoken out in public, but they've never been documented like this before, and it was incredible.
Are you telling me they sat on these interviews for a decade?
They sat on them for a decade, and I don't know why. Maybe they were like, wait, like they interviewed them in 2013, which would have been the 50th anniversary. Yeah, but they never released the interviews until the 60th anniversary, and I just found it was fascinating because they had like pertinent information to the case. So
I shot a documentary in 2010, and I have like 20 really good interviews that I never did anything with because I got bitter because we lost funding on the project, and I've never done anything with them. So but I didn't interview the people that worked on JFK. Like, that's
yeah.
insane.
Well, that might have been what, like, the production company, like, things fell through and things could have
That
happened, and then
reality, yeah.
Paramount Plus picked it up, and then they updated it. They did have some more up-to-date interviews with some more current folks. But the documentary centered around the Parkland doctors, most of which are all dead now because it was 60 years ago.
Yeah,
So
I'm shocked they were alive to interview him 50 years ago, to be quite, or 10 years ago. Like,
yeah,
not 50
yeah.
years after he died. Like, and you figure most of the doctors have been in their 30s. So these guys were in their 80s then. That's
Yeah,
wild.
and that's why, and they look good too. I mean, doctors, right? and
Yeah.
so, and some of them, like I think, like 2 of them were like, they were in residency at the time, but they
Okay.
were still like on the front lines, like helping out with the neurosurgeons and stuff like that. And actually, one of them actually, gave JFK a tracheotomy, to try to keep him alive, and like his account was very good. He had very good recall.
So, like, okay, because I went through a JFK conspiracy theory phase. I was like in my teenage years. So it's been a
Yeah.
long time since I waded into this world. What is the current uh conspiracy du jour, if you will?
Well, there's several, and most of
Hit
them
on me.
most of them surrounding the bullet. Okay, the so called magic bullet, and where the entry wound was versus the exit wound. Right now, the Warren Commission. So let me double back. So for those of you that don't know, John F. Kennedy, President of the United
Fairly
States of
certain.
America,
Fairly
was
certain
was
everybody
a
knows this part. Like,
yes, assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. And the after he was assassinated, Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested for it, and they said that he had shot him from behind of on, I believe, the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, there in Dealey Plaza. So he's doing a tour. He's in a convertible. He's with Governor Connolly, the governor of Texas. They're driving around, and then the Warren Commission is saying that Lee Harvey Oswald shot him from behind twice. He shot him twice, one through the throat and then one through the back of the head. That's what they're saying, right? And then one of the bullets, a magic bullet that had absolutely no damage done to it, went through several parts of JFK's body and then into Governor Connolly and actually shot Governor Connolly. And they were unable to find this magic bullet. And then all of a sudden, it just appeared on a gurney later, found by a Secret Service agent. Now another Secret Service agent just came came forward 60 years later. Surprise, surprise, he's got a book out saying he actually found it in the vehicle before that. But I don't know if I buy that one. Like, why would it take you 60 years to tell people that one? But that one's a bit fishy to me. But so that is the prevailing theory. Now, Lee Harvey Oswald did deny it. He said that he was a patsy, which I think is very pertinent to the story, very pertinent to the case. And then he ultimately was shot by Jack Ruby, who was a JFK sympathizer. And there's lots of stuff going on in Lee Harvey Oswald's life. Lee Harvey Oswald was a guy that actually defected to Russia. He was an army guy. He worked on U-2 spy planes. He defected to Russia, became a Russian sympathizer. He got married there. He comes back to the United States. He's welcomed with open arms and actually given money, even though he was a communist. And they, at a time when communists were the devil, they bring him right back into the country, and then he becomes a Castro sympathizer. And he's anti-U.S., anti-government, and he's going around and he's on the CIA watch list. All this stuff's going on in this guy's life at the same time, right? And then he ultimately gets murdered before they actually have a trial. They say, nope, he did it. That's the end of it. And then the Warren Commission, of course, who, some very famous people were in the Warren Commission. Obviously, the former CIA director, Alan Dulles. You had Gerald Ford, the future president, and then several more people. And the Supreme Court justice was the head of it, Chief Justice Warren, obviously. So they come to the conclusion that, yep, it's exactly as the police said. He was a lone wolf, a lone gunman, shot him from the back, hit him twice, and that was it. Now, they came to that conclusion before the Zapruder film was ever released. A lot of people don't know this. Some people think that the Zapruder film was released right away. It actually wasn't released till like the mid-'70s on the Geraldo show.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Are you telling me Oliver Stone is full of shit?
No. Oliver Stone talked about it on one of his latest documentaries. Like, that Zapruder film was not released to the public. The government had the film, but it was not really, the public didn't have a copy of it until the mid-'70s, and was debuted on the Geraldo show, the Geraldo Rivera show.
Okay. So, are you familiar with Penn and Teller's Bullshit?
I'm familiar with Penn and Teller, but I have not seen Bullshit.
Bullshit was this show they had on HBO in the I want to say mid-2000s. And they were anti-conspiracy theory, shall we say. So their whole thing was all these things are bullshit, right? And so they did an entire thing about how the magic bullet isn't actually a magic bullet. It actually has everything to do with, and I should send you this. I should have sent you this before, but I was not prepared for the show. So then it was actually had more to do with the alignment of Kennedy and Connolly's bodies at the time, that they weren't in the positions that the Warren Commission specifically said they were, because the Warren Commission has the bullet going, doing all kinds of this kind of shit. Yeah. Where they're saying that the guy was actually, they were actually turned in a completely different way, which in their reinterpretation of this, the way they did it, it looks like the bullet just traveled straight through. So I don't know. I'd like to send this to you and get your opinion. Would have been great podcast material, but here we are.
Yeah, no, and I do love the alternative to it. And the video, I've seen videos where people are like dead set on the magic bullet theory is true. It is legit. Like, it just happened to be like the weirdest bullet in history that went through all that different flesh and bone, and then it came out on a gurney later and had no damage done to it. Right? Like, the FBI and several people years later tried to reenact the scenario using like actual tissue to do it from the same trajectory and everything, and they could not get it to do the same thing that it had done before. So that whole thing is weird to me. So the reason why I wanted to start off with the Parkland doctors is because they stated in their initial report, the people that actually saw Kennedy first, non-government employees, non-Secret Service, non-CIA, non-military, they stated that the wound from the neck and the wound from the head were entry wounds. The initial, so the entry was in the front. The bullets entered from the front and then exploded out the back. And then when you watch the Zapruder film, you see Kennedy. You know, I should bring up the Zapruder film because this is going to be on YouTube. And so when you watch the Zapruder film, you can actually see the place where the actual, when the bullet hits his face and his head snaps back, and you can see his head explode. It's the wildest thing. So here, and I will get it. But what they'll have you believe is that it was like a recoil effect. The bullet came from the back and like recoiled and made his hair jar the opposite way. And I'm just like, I just don't understand how that could even be possible. But here's the Zapruder film. They actually have it in color now for all of us. Back in the day, they did not. So JD's watching this in real time with me. So there, he's already hit. He's already got it. She's checking on him. She's checking on him, and then boom, right there, and like his head explodes, and the front of his head explodes. That's the thing that always gets me. And I'll stop share screen. So that was the thing that always got me. It's like they're telling me that it came from behind, but the video to me looks like it came from the front. And so that part I just never really understood. And now, you know, that doesn't mean that Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't a part of this whole thing. I just don't think he was the only one. I think it's very obvious that there was another shooter and that he came from the grassy knoll right there behind a picket fence and shot him from the front. That's what I think. Now who did it? I think that becomes, JD, you sent me a video.
I did. This is the same show that I was talking about, the Penn and Teller's bullshit, and it's specifically about the head movement.
Okay.
So
All right.
I'm not sure how long. I haven't seen this in, to be quite frank, at least 12 years.
Yeah,
This
I wonder
is
if we would get a strike.
46 seconds. What if we just keep
Yeah,
it on
let's
Patreon? We'll
show it.
go.
I'm worried that we'll get a strike, but if we do, we'll just pull it. All right. So
Yeah.
let's present this
Let's do
here.
this.
So this is JD showing me Penn and Teller or Penn Jillette from HBO.
Is the skull for our melon. Dr. Louis explained that a bullet penetrating a skull doesn't transfer much of its energy to the head. It's a tiny hole, slides right in. The brain doesn't present much resistance, and when the bullet pops out the other side, it pulls a lot of brain, or in this case, melon goo, with it. The bullet and goo make a little jet blast that pushes the melon head in the opposite direction. Watch. The bullet and goo make a little jet blast that pushes the melon head in the opposite direction. Second gunman, my aching ass.
Oh, those guys are really funny. I don't know. I watched the video. And I see the explosion coming from the front, right? So I see that, and then we get the actual doctors that are on the ground to see him first, and they all state, like in unison, all of them, they're non-government officials. They don't have any reason to lie, right? They're no part of this. They say that the bullets entered from the front, both of them. And I have no reason, like I don't know why. And I think their detractors are saying, oh well, there was just too much blood. How could they possibly know? And they didn't really get a good look at it the way that we did. We were able to do a full autopsy, yada yada. There was a lot more to it. Part of the reason why there's such a conspiracy about it is because the autopsy should have been done by non-government officials, and it should have been done in the state of Texas, which is what the law states there in Texas. But the government took the body while it was basically still warm, took the body, flew it back, and then of course they took it to a local Navy hospital there in Bethesda, Maryland, to do the actual autopsy, and people weren't allowed to be a part of that.
I think the argument against what you're talking about, it revolves around inertia and how inertia forces things forward. Like when something comes here, it does have that boom effect. Like it's like when you're driving in my dog. We used to joke about my dog that her worst enemy was inertia, right? Because she would be sitting in the car and I would have to hit the brake and she would like go flying.
Yes.
Right. So I mean that's kind of what we'll call them the Oswald people, right?
Yeah.
People that believe Oswald acted alone would state that if the bullet would go from the back, the trajectory of the brain exploding would create that same inertia flow that pops forward and moves to the back. My brother, who majored in physics in college, breaks this down much better, much more intelligently than the guy hosting the wrestling podcast. Let me tell you. But so that's kind of where that idea comes from. And I guess one thing they say about traumatic, and like this is something we talk about too with traumatic incidents and traumatic incident interviews, is that the people on the site are typically the worst people to interview because The Rashomon effect, if you will, right? You familiar with
Mhm.
Rashomon?
No.
Rashomon is a Japanese film from the 1940s, 50s. It is a story about the same incident from the perspectives of three different characters, and how each one of these is slightly different, right? Because the idea behind it is human perceptions aren't correct all the time,
Yeah.
right? Is that what you see in front of you isn't necessarily the way it happens, right? So the idea, that's why they oftentimes people will say that guy shot this guy, or this is the guy that robbed me, or this is the guy that did this, and they're completely wrong. Because they don't, especially in a crisis situation, your brain isn't
Mhm.
processing information correctly. Right.
Yeah.
You're in a state of shock. You're in a state of panic. I mean, dude, you're in the military. You get that. I mean, like you get that more than
Oh,
anybody.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Like
yeah. Yeah.
so.
And I've been in, like, crazy traumatic,
Mhm.
situations, and my memories of those traumatic situations and those crazy situations, are a bit foggy, and they change, right? And
Right.
then you talk to people and you try to get to, like, okay, this is how it actually happened, and then all of a sudden it starts to trigger your memory, right? With the Parkland doctors, where I don't really think that holds a ton of water,
Mhm.
is that these guys are seeing thousands of gunshot victims and stab wounds, and this is a trauma hospital, the top trauma hospital in all the state of Texas. These people are just super experienced with this type of stuff, right? Now, the JFK one is a bit more traumatic because that's the president,
Right.
right? And so that adds a layer to it. But I just believe what they're saying, not because I want the conspiracy to be true, like that. I just believe what they're saying because they're they're very good at the way they tell the stories, but they're right there on the ground and they have the most experience with this. The folks that did the autopsy, they didn't actually have the type of experience that would even be necessary to treat this type of person, right? This type of victim. And that was brought out in several documentaries. Oliver Stone brought that out before, and then in this Parkland one, which is not an Oliver Stone deal at all, it was like a separate deal. They talked about that too.
I I don't think we can bring Oliver Stone's credibility into this at all, because he played, like in JFK, he plays fast and loose
He
with a
does.
lot of facts, and he just gets a lot of stuff wrong. And like
He
that
he
entire
Hollywoodized it, but his
big
um
time,
his
big
his
time.
documentary of the magic bullet though, because after the JFK papers were released, I think in like 2021, I think Trump got a lot of those documents unclassified.
Mhm.
A lot of the documents centered around the magic bullet, and he just kind of really tore apart the magic bullet theory. And I think that was that. Now, if we're getting into like Jim Garrison and Clay Shaw
Yeah.
and those type of cats, you know what, I think where Oliver Stone messed up is he had like a definitive, like these guys did it, and then put a bunch of like a twisted, weird sexual type of stuff. And I think that just kind of ruined everything for him. To where if it was true, I don't think anybody's taking him all that seriously. And those people weren't alive to defend themselves anymore once he made the movie, because he made it in 1991,
Mhm.
and Clay Shaw had been dead for 10 years, and some of the other people that in the movie that he's talking about. I think Jim Garrison might have even been dead, the lawyer that
I
I
think he
think
might
he
have
was
been.
I think he
Jim
I think he was too.
Well,
So
he wasn't Kevin Costner, you know?
no,
So, I mean, like, and the people kind of, I believe JFK won the Oscar in 1991,
it's a
and it's a
great
movie.
movie.
It is a well-made movie.
Yeah,
Oliver Stone's a
yeah,
great filmmaker,
he
but it's
is.
a movie that a lot of times the movies that get a lot of notoriety at the time get looked back on as like, "What the fuck were we thinking?" So, I mean,
Yeah.
and again, this I remember, I'm a little bit older than you, and I remember I saw this movie at the theater. Like, for
Oh,
some
really?
reason, my mom thought it was a great idea to take the 11-year-old to go see JFK.
I I didn't watch it until I was in my 20s, honestly. It
So,
took me forever to actually get that one on my radar.
my mom was this huge, I don't call her a conspiracy nut, but she kind of dug into a lot of these things. Like, she was super into the Time Life books, and like she read
Yeah,
a lot. So she was like shaped my I was a super believer into all these things. And then I've kind of gone the other way because my mom was wacky. So I mean, like, I've kind of gone the other way, and I'm a big skeptic on just about everything. So I
yeah.
mean, like, this is kind of where I know you're definitely more into the conspiracy side of this, and I'm a little bit more of the
Mhm. Well,
because of guys like Oliver Stone,
yeah, yeah.
because that's
what
record.
what gets me more on the conspiracy side, especially when you're talking about our government and the way they operated in the
Yeah, I
60s, and
can't argue that.
how they treated Kennedy with the Bay of
Mhm.
Pigs situation and the invasion of Cuba, and how they tried to create a false flag operation with Operation Northwoods,
Mhm.
and how they started the Vietnam War with the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which was another false flag
Yep.
to get Lyndon Johnson to get into war. They were doing whatever they could to get into war with Russia and with Cuba and with Vietnam because the military industrial complex wanted that money. Right, that's what this whole thing was about. So, do I believe that the government could have done that? Yes, I do. I like that. That doesn't surprise me. And do I believe that the government would create an entire PR campaign to get everybody on board and denounce everybody else as conspiracy theorists and as stupid people and as people that don't love their country for thinking that their government could do something like that? We've seen it recently. Absolutely, they could have done it. So I think that the possibility is there. Now, do I have a definitive idea of what exactly happened? Absolutely not, because I don't think we're ever going to find out.
Here's where I dispute, dispute's a harsh term. Here's where I disagree with a lot of where this comes from. I don't know. Was all stuff you said true? Yeah, 100%. But we know it, right? Like our government, especially at the time, is very bad at keeping secrets. Let me tell you about a
Yeah,
little thing called Watergate. Like they
yeah,
couldn't
yeah,
cover up a break. They couldn't cover up a break into a shitty motel in DC,
yeah.
right? I
Well,
mean, like, and that was news, like, and that was out like almost instantly. So I just have a hard time. I have a hard time believing that the government would be able to keep all this stuff kind of the arguments will they have it because we all talk about it and have been talking about it for
yeah,
60 years. But I mean, like, I don't see them being being, you know,
being competent enough
oh,
to
thank you. I
keep
couldn't think of
those.
the word. Being
Yeah,
competent enough to pull it
and,
off.
and I think that's a great argument because when the Pentagon Papers came out in the 70s, right, that revealed a
Yeah,
lot of the dirty deeds that they were doing. I get it. Assassinations are kind of a different level, though. I mean, because and we had so many in the 60s. We have the famous ones that we all know about, of course. The two Kennedy brothers,
right. And Martin Luther King,
and then Martin Luther King, and then Malcolm X,
Malcolm
and
X.
and all the different things that were going on. And then if you take a look at it, and I had some notes, and I don't even really need the notes too much because I don't want to get too crazy into the weeds. But Lee Harvey Oswald, it came out later, was a CIA asset. Like they were tracking this guy, and there are a lot of people that actually believe that when he defected to Russia, he was there as a double agent, which would explain the reason why he came back to America and he was greeted with open arms and given money and things like that. And when at a time when if you were in Hollywood and you were a communist sympathizer, you
No,
were getting
no,
so this happened a little bit after that, but
yeah. I mean,
but we were so anti-communist at the time. You know what I mean? Like to
you're,
come back from being a Russian
there's
sympathizer
a
and defector.
there's a huge swing. You're right. 52, 53, when McCarthy is really hitting the ground with his big Red Scare campaigns. Yeah.
Yeah.
But by the time Edward R. Murrow puts him on TV in 54, like things really changed. Like McCarthy completely blew his credibility. And
Yeah.
and this is part of the problem, is like the wind really falls out of the sails of the anti-communist movement at that point. Like by
Mhm.
55, the scare is over. And the reason why that the government has to work so hard to drum up interest in war with Russia is that or not Kennedy, excuse me, McCarthy really overplays that hand. And so now anybody with who is super anti-communist is seen as a McCarthyist. And at that point, in the mid to late 50s, it's worse to be a McCarthyist than
Yeah.
it is to be a communist. Like that guy killed his entire political career and soured the entire state of Wisconsin.
Yeah, he had one of the most disgusting presidents that we've ever had.
Oh,
Truman kind of come out against him, and that's us. And then of course Eisenhower too was completely anti-McCarthyism, but
everyone, everyone
every
was.
but we were still there. The anti-communist rhetoric was still out
It
there,
was still out
and
there, but
we were still like we still had kids hiding under their desks. You're training for nuclear war,
that did happen.
and we almost got there with the Cuban Missile
I think.
Crisis, right?
Mhm.
So we were absolutely adversarial with Russia. So to have a guy that was prior military that worked on the U-2 spy plane as part of that program defect to Russia and then just be welcomed back with open arms, I find to be a bit suspect. And the
I
fact
can't
of the
argue
matter
that.
is, weeks before the assassination, he's down in Mexico, and he's coming right back in Mexico City, and they're tracing his footsteps down there. And here's another thing, and I don't know if you're that familiar with it, but did you know that just I don't know if it was like a couple weeks or just a few weeks prior to the actual assassination, there was another attempt that was thwarted in Chicago. Were you aware of that one?
I've heard stories, but I don't know off the top of my head the entire story of the first assassination attempt of Kennedy.
Yeah. So the first assassination attempt, I don't know if it was the first, but the previous one that happened in Chicago that was thwarted by the Secret Service, they got tipped off, was a guy that every check mark that you can think of when it comes to Lee Harvey Oswald, like prior military, Russia, on the CIA watch list, like FBI watch list, all these different things. He was Oswald before he was Oswald.
Mhm.
And like the entire plan was very similar to the plan that actually was executed in Dallas. It just got thwarted, and they actually ended up not going to Chicago. And it was so that those two things happening so close together and being so similar, kind of like, oh my God, like there's got to be something to this.
But doesn't the fact that it got thwarted like help like deprune that argument a little bit? Like, as if they wanted to get, if the government was behind trying to get rid of him, why not just get rid of him in Chicago to begin with?
Because because like Secret Service is different than the FBI, it's different than the CIA,
Fair.
different than the State Department. You know what I mean? Secret Service, very serious people, take their job seriously.
Well, yeah.
And you know what I mean? And so somebody tipped him off, somebody maybe like a pro Kennedy person tipped off the whole deal. And thwarted the whole thing, and then it was executed weeks later in Dallas. So, we got that, and then just so many people died after during the witnesses. A lot of them were dying off, and actually Richard Belzer wrote a book. It says Arthur Richard Belzer took witness to deaths to a new level in 2013, publishing Hit List, an in-depth investigation of the mysterious deaths of witnesses to the JFK assassination. Belzer claimed that 50 people linked to the assassination were murdered as part of a cover-up. And there are people that are countering these claims, but just like different random deaths, that are happening like right around this time, of people that say that they have information, people that are witnesses and things like that. I think that's very suspicious. I
mean, anytime something like this happens, though, there's always quacks that come out of the works. Like, I got the secret, I know what happened, and it's like 99 times out of 100, it's a lunatic who is just talking. Like, like I said, man, I don't know. Do I think the government's on the complete up and up with everything? No, absolutely not. And especially when you have guys like Hoover involved, who tried to basically run things, like tried to basically run the country with his secret police. I mean, that's real. Like, you can't argue that's not real. Like, I think what it comes down to is I don't think there's enough coordination between the government to pull this off successfully.
But the CIA, there's no better expert at assassinations than the CIA.
They fucked up, but that's all they're gonna be pigs. They fucked up killing Castro.
They did, but they have better success in their own country. Like they just know Dallas a little bit better than they know Cuba. They just knew the lay of the land better. And look, and it could have not been the CIA. It could have not been the CIA, right? Here's another one that's out there. And I don't think this one's like the craziest thing to think about, is that there was a second gunman. They caught him. But the nation was trying to heal, and the Warren Commission was a facade the whole time. And there was such a they had this big book that they posted out, which a lot of his stuff had been refuted years later. Like, new information comes out, and some of that stuff turns out wasn't actually the case. That they actually did catch him, and it was somebody that they don't want us to know about. And it could have been an independent thing with a few different people, or a few people that really just hated Kennedy, right? Because it's not the weirdest thing. There could have been a coordinated effort. I just think that it's very plausible and reasonable that yes, Oswald was one, and he was a patsy for a large organization. It could have been a non-government agency, and that there was a second or even a third shooter to make sure that this thing got done, and they were able to catch whoever it was, and they just never released the information. And the reason why I think that's possible is because the papers are still not they're not unredacted. We can't get all the documents. Even when they released more documents in 2021, they still had a bunch of black ink all over them, like blacked out. So I think that one is also pretty reasonable.
Well, okay, okay, devil's advocate.
Yeah.
How does not revealing that heal a nation that already suspects that is a problem?
You know what? That would be the weird thing, right? Like how does that actually help? Because I think by not giving us all the information, it's just kept the story alive
For sure.
a very long time.
Yeah, and
you know
that's
what I mean?
and yeah, I know exactly what you mean. That's where I mean, like, is that possible? Sure, 100% that's
Yeah.
possible. Stuff like that happens all the time. But I
Yeah.
mean, like, but not releasing that information. I mean, like, what does the government have to gain, especially in 2023? Like, I think everybody knows the Warren Commission was full of shit. By the way, wasn't Gerald Ford one of the heads of the Warren Commission?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Gerald
I mean-
Ford, the guy who decided not to prosecute Nixon. He actually pardoned Nixon, one of the great criminal presidents ever.
The only
But-
non-elected president in U.S. history.
Yeah.
So I mean, like, I will not tell you the 1960s government wasn't shady, and it would not surprise me to know that Oswald was working with somebody. Do
Yeah.
I believe he cooked this whole thing in his head? I don't know. Like, we'll never know the truth with that.
Yeah.
But, and I'm willing to listen to things. I'm willing to listen to anything. But I mean, I hear things. Well, what if they caught the guy? Okay, well, why wouldn't you brag about that? Why
Yeah.
would you say, you know what? You're fucking right. We couldn't tell you that because we weren't having you guys freak out. But look what we did. We caught this guy. And then
So
you parade him on the streets. Like,
Yeah.
people would be like, if you want people singing God Bless America and waving the flag, we caught the other guy that killed Kennedy.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you do that?
Counterpoint, it's like Lyndon Johnson's little brother or something like that. And there's like, oh fuck, we don't need that. we don't need this bullshit,
Okay, if it was Billy Bob Carter, okay, I'm fine.
Yeah.
You got me on that one.
Yeah. Dude, I don't know. For some reason, I can't completely buy that he acted alone and that he was able to pull this thing off by himself. You know what I mean? And then it's just like a real coincidence that he just happened to be working there. He was able to get the job. He had just moved to Dallas. He was able to get the job right there at Dealey Plaza. He just happened to be able to work on the 6th floor. It just seems like there's a lot of coordination here. And then the, eyewitness reports of people on the ground, I hear gunshots. Honestly, if somebody shot a gun down the street from me, I might think it's coming from the opposite direction. You know what I mean? Because of the acoustics in the neighborhood. And I think that's a very real thing. So while people were thinking that it was coming from the grassy knoll, it could have absolutely come from above, and it could have come from across the street. Like I don't really take their eyewitness accounts into effect.
Mike, I'm a civilian. I've never shot a gun in my life. If I heard a gunshot go off tomorrow, I couldn't tell you what direction it came from.
Yeah,
I'm gonna tell you it's loud. That's what I'm gonna say. And you're gonna make a guess because people don't know shit. I think, and this is when it comes to all conspiracies, this is kind of where I believe, and this is a personal thing, is that I think people want to believe in a big, powerful organization that operates in the shadows because it takes out the idea of chaos and random chance. Right.
Yeah.
And I think the idea of chaos and random chance is far scarier to people than the idea of this big conspiracy. I think people are more comforted by conspiracies because that shows that there is power, right?
Mhm.
And I think the idea of some random nutcase was able to pull this shit off is a far more terrifying concept to people.
Yeah. No, and I think that's true, and I think that the random nutcases were running rampant in the '60s. James Earl Ray shot Martin Luther King, and Sirhan killing RFK, and
I mean,
John Lennon's killer. Yeah,
that was in the '80s.
Yeah.
But I mean, look at what the '60s was because of stuff like we just talked about with McCarthyism in the '50s, right? The '50s in the U.S. is very much a time of control. Right. we're establishing, and when people like, especially, I'm going to get a little political, so when these Republicans talk about the way things used to be in the 50s, right? You see what the government wanted us to project, and it was that Leave It to Beaver image of, this is Americana, this is the way it is. All that's, I miss the way it was. The fucking truth is, it's never been like that. It never was like that in this country. It's always been tumultuous, right? And in the 60s, people just said, fuck this shit. And they were crazy about it all over the place, right? Because they got tired of the government trying to enact control. And I'm pretty sure my headphones just went dead, so I'm going to make my point and change my headphones in a second. Like, that's why the 60s were the way they were, because people were pissed off, right? Like, my dad's an aging hippie, so I mean, like, he'll talk about those sort of things at the 68 convention and ran like hell when the cops came. I'll turn over to you. I got to change headphones.
Yeah. Yeah, he's absolutely right, and I know exactly where he's coming from, what he's talking about. It's just so many awful things were being perpetrated by the government. The fact that we were able to get into the Vietnam War, the fact that the government was trying to push us into a war with Russia, they invaded Cuba, they failed the attempt at Castro. I just can't get over the fact that all of those things happened. I just can't stop thinking about the fact that those things happened, and I just absolutely can believe that this was like a coordinated assassination attempt, that more people were involved than just one guy, but they just wanted to close the book on it as fast as they can to get the country to heal and to move on, and for Lyndon Johnson to take power, and then to kind of like and then put that out there while they got this big Vietnam War thing going on at the same time. Now, but if somebody were to tell me like reasonably, like, hey, like, you're full of shit, it was just Oswald, I think that's also a pretty reasonable conclusion too. Like, I think that is also probable, because we saw the lone gunman all throughout the 60s, and then into the 70s, and then the 80s. Like, Ronald Reagan was shot in the 80s. Like, this, like, from the early 1960s all the way through the 80s, like, this stuff was happening all the time. But at the same time,
it's still happening. It just doesn't happen to famous people anymore.
Right.
Now it happens to like kids in school. And stuff like that. Like, that's we've never fixed this problem. And I argue against the whole, well, we needed America to heal thing, because clearly when you look at it, it never healed.
It never did.
Things got so much worse. But all you gotta do is look at what happened a century earlier with Lincoln, right? When Lincoln gets assassinated, like, the Civil War is over already. Shit gets so much worse.
Yeah.
Andrew Johnson's a terrible president, followed up by Grant, who's even worse. Like, and things are awful in the South. You've got the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. Like we never heal after assassinations, right?
No.
It's always worse. So I don't know. Like, I push back at the argument, well, we had to you had to cover this up to let America heal. And it's like,
I don't think they had to. I think it's possible that that was their intent, and then they failed miserably.
They did fail, because either way it failed miserably.
Yeah, because I think they thought, and I really believe that they thought, that by getting us into a war, it was like World War II and even the Korean War. Like, people were behind the Korean War at first, right? Mm-hmm. And so we get into Vietnam. They thought that was going to bring the country together, like, in unison, and the Gulf of Tonkin incident to get us into war. And they could not have been more wrong about the Vietnam War. People hated that from the jump. Right. Yeah. There's never been any more time in our history where people were more anti-military than during the Vietnam War. And I talked to my uncle about it, who was a Army paratrooper. He was jumping out of a helicopter, basically. He was a bad motherfucker. Not like me, I test water, but he was like a badass going over there, jumping into shooting Charlie and all that shit. Like, he was all about that. And he was like, yeah, I came back, and like, they were spitting on me, calling me baby killer and shit like that at the airport. Like, it was fucking bad. He's like, I don't know what I was doing here. But he goes, I didn't even volunteer. I got drafted. It's like, I was like forced into going there. So like, I think it very likely could have been like they were trying to bring the country together and then get us into a war. And then that way we can go win this war. And then the complete opposite happens. Fucking Lyndon Johnson has a terrible presidency. He did some good stuff, right? He signed some good bills, but ultimately, the civil rights one being the top one. ultimately a failure though because of the Vietnam War. And then we get Nixon, who was one of the fucking worst we ever had. Although, he's given me some job with the EPA and OSHA and things like that. I mean, but you take a look at all the bad shit that he did. Just incredibly bomb.
Almost every president has good shit on their resume. Almost. There's a
Yes.
couple. There's a few in his scattered in history that are really, really bad. But I mean, like, and this is here's they might have thought that Americans would have won rally right away for war, but I mean, like, when they learn, like, on day 6 that that's not going to happen, they don't give a fuck. Which is the thing with the
Yeah.
American, no offense, with the American industrial military complex, is they don't care what dudes like me think,
No.
right? They don't fucking care. They're just gonna go do their thing, like.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think it's always been that way. Like, we want, like, World War II, we wanted to get involved in World War II, but there was enough presence at home that was like, no, we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't do
Yeah.
that
Both
until
World Wars.
both World Wars. One
And
and they were like, one is more of a World War One is more of an international skirmish between shit that maybe we shouldn't have stuck our nose into until we had no choice, right? Because that's imperialism versus nationalism, essentially, right?
And
Where-
Wilson did everything he could to stay out of that war,
Just
but
stay
then
out of that.
when they blew up, I can't think of the name of the
The
ship. that they-
Lusitania.
The Lusitania, yeah. When they blew that up and there was American civilians on it, and it's like, okay, well now we fucking gotta
Now
go.
we gotta go in
right?
there.
Yeah.
Like-
and then he was all in at that point, and so was everybody else. And then like FDR did not want to get into World War II, and then eventually like he
But
tried
they're-
not to.
But we were doing stuff. We were supplying the Allies. We were there. I mean, like, we're there, but we're not really there.
Yeah.
Like, we want to be involved, but it's all. And this is what worked out for us Americans: is we're over here in the Western Hemisphere. It's the Eastern Hemisphere that got fucking pummeled, right? Central Europe is destroyed in World War II. Nothing happened here. So we're the only superpower left. Russia somehow. Russia got brutalized too. But I mean, like, they were the survivors over there, so they recover. Like, it's like this when they want it bad. I'm not going to say there's conspiracy theory for World War II, because there is none. Like, we had no reason to go to war with Germany until Hitler says we declare war on them too.
Yeah.
And then we're like, oh fuck it, we're in war with Hitler. Our quarrel was with the Japanese, right? Who were just making a quick little raid so they could get some supplies.
Well,
right?
They were pissed. Well, they were broke because we stopped their oil supply, right? And
because we were involved in the war before we were involved in the war.
We were trying to be slick about it, and then they absolutely drug us into it. I mean, I drive by the bullets every day.
You know better than anybody.
The bullet holes are still in the buildings here. I drive by, and then I actually saw them at the clinic. There was like a spot in our clinic because it's a national historical building where they actually preserve the bullet holes from our clinic where I work every day. So yeah, I did see it. The response was not great by them.
The difference with World War II is that, like, it's so easy to point at the enemy as being like really bad. Like, it's one of the few conflicts in like the history of the planet where you can really point to one side and go, yeah, they were wrong.
Yeah.
Right. Because oftentimes wars are so much more, they're about politics. They're about, I want this. No, I want this. And that's every war since. But this is the one time they were like, oh my God, they're trying to exterminate humans.
Evil. These are evil folks.
Like, that was, and that's why, and I think that's why there's still such a fascination of World War II today, because it's like one of the few you could argue morally justified. And I'm not saying that war should be morally justified. I'm saying that one could make the argument because they were just so bad. Like, astonishingly.
And that's why I'm like, and we'll wrap this up. I think we went from JFK into World War II, but I love World War II. Yeah. Same. So, but that's why I'm like, when people compare like people now to Hitler, I'm like, okay, pump the brakes, because if Putin's Hitler, let's go do this, right? Or if Netanyahu, or if all these other folks like Hamas and all these other different people, Saddam Hussein, okay, that's Hitler. Okay, well, let's go, right? But it's a little bit different. Like, a lot of this stuff, like these are assholes, right? And bad people, but we have to be careful of which conflicts and which people we're getting involved in, and we got to stop comparing people to Hitler, right? Especially like even like our own politicians here. It's like, oh well, he's the next Hitler. It's like, no, like he's a jerk, right? But he's not the next Hitler.
Hitler's on another level. Like when
Yeah.
you've ruined two names, when you've ruined the first name and the last name, where nobody can ever have those again.
Yeah.
Like it's bad. Like I hate. There's some bad things going on in the world right now, and I don't want to wade into any of that stuff because that's not
No,
our. I don't want to do that. It's
it's not my expertise.
me neither, and I want to. Even with Hitler, we knew what was going on, and the world the world turned a collective blind eye until it couldn't anymore,
Hmm.
right? And if Hitler does a couple things differently, the planet rolls out the red carpet for the guy.
Yeah.
And that's what's really sad. And he overplayed his hand kind of slightly in some
Yeah.
aspects, right?
Yeah.
Because there's the history of the world can be very different with just a few changes. And that's what's scary is like you're right, we can't compare people to Hitler, but you know, Hitler isn't Hitler without a couple changes.
Yeah.
You know, it's like people people let people turn a blind like this the stuff that was going on in Germany was going on long before 1941, right?
Dude, like in like the early 30s, like his
Yeah,
rise, you know what I mean?
33
So yeah,
starts.
so this is going on forever. And then
Right,
he just like it escalates year after year after
right.
year.
He
And then he starts getting into like taking over Poland and getting
uh-huh.
into other turf. And then
See,
like that, like what he was doing to his own people like the Allied forces, they didn't take care of, but when they went into these other countries to Poland and to
well,
France and doing all that,
Poland's when people were like, "Okay, we should probably do something," because he walked into the
yeah,
Sudetenland is like, "This is ours now," and everybody went, "Okay, you can have the Sudetenland. Who wants the Sudetenland? You can have the Sudetenland." Like, and it was like, "Okay, appeasement, Chamberlain, appeasement. He wants a little
yeah.
bit more stuff. Let him have it."
Chamberlain, Neville Chamberlain made a deal with the guy and like
Yeah,
it rolled out the red carpet for him
well,
and was just
totally.
like, yeah, I'm doing peace. And then of course after that, Hitler completely broke the deal.
Yeah,
It's
because
like
oh,
yeah,
what a shocker.
yeah. So
That's what I'm saying,
uh
but he overplayed his hand because they
yeah,
were just giving him stuff, and he's like, "Well, I'm gonna take Poland now." And then
yeah,
people were like, "Ooh, maybe we should stop him. Maybe?"
yeah,
And then France
yep,
got just mopped immediately. Like, so I mean, it's a couple different plays, and like if you don't get a prime minister like Churchill, that's like, "Fuck it, let's do this." You know,
right.
everything can be so different in history. It's fascinating. Boy, we are off the fucking rails. We promised
We
a
are,
half
yeah, I
hour
know.
and we're 47
Yeah,
minutes
I'm
in.
sorry. Well, this is my favorite podcast we've ever done. I love this.
It turns out we can do more than wrestling.
Yeah. And Daza, this one's for you, buddy. I hope you really like this show. He's been wanting us to talk about JFK for a while, and I wanted to wait until November. So,
The English guy wanting us to talk about the JFK. Okay.
hey, yeah, if he wants to talk about
We'll do it.
Neville Chamberlain and Winston Churchill, like dude, I'm in. I love fucking World War II. So, let's do it, man. But hey, guys, thank you so much for supporting the podcast and supporting Overtime. JD and I will try to knock out another overtime at some point this weekend once we get the results of the Hall of Fame. Probably, hopefully, a quick one at some point this weekend, and then we'll release that to you guys. And then next week we're off. So, and then I'll do a brace for impact at some point. So, thanks everybody for checking out the show, and until next time, mahalo.
Happy Thanksgiving.